And so we're going to turn over next to John Michael and Scott, who are going to be talking to us about exploring ethical international development experience for undergraduate students, reflections and departures from WPI's South Africa and Puerto Rico project centers.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. I'm John Michael Davis. I'm joined by our tech whiz, Scott Jiusto. We're both faculty members in the Department of Integrative and Global Studies at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, or what we call WPI. And for our workshop session today, we're going to collaboratively with all of you explore the various considerations that we face when facilitating ethical and reciprocal global experiences for our students. And I've been really encouraged to see that a lot of our discussion we've had for the past few days have been centered around in different ways about challenges with building relationships and exploring those tension points between various forms of study abroad experiences. So we all know colleges have increasingly been exploring ways to send students abroad as a means to develop their cultural competence. Sometimes there's language acquisition goals or opportunities to develop an enhanced understanding of their personal identities, among other reasons. And for international development studies programs in particular, there's this importance of gaining field experience is widely perceived as a critical asset for success in this field. But international experiential learning has also been increasingly critiqued for generating modest and at times negative impacts with host communities, which has led to calls to rethink the ways we build reciprocal relationships that foreground mutual learning, equitable partnerships, transparency, and really drive cooperative and positive change. But navigating these goals among multiple parties with different agendas and histories can be a real ongoing challenge. So in our workshop today, we're going to begin by sharing our own global experience model at WPI to contextualize where we're coming from in our approach. We recognize that there's no end to the types of models for global experiences, but we expect many of which we've heard in the last 2 days, whether it's through internships or courses abroad or service learning. We expect a lot of the ethical challenges that we face in your programs will cross over and be relatable. We're then going to anchor our discussion within a simple framework of ethical considerations that happen before, during, and after students participate in global experiences. And for each of these three headings, Scott and I are going to highlight some, not an exhaustive list, but several considerations that come to mind through our own experiences, along with a short vignette detailing a specific instance, either in our South Africa or Puerto Rico project centers that we direct or have directed, that illustrate these tensions. And these are intended to be a point of departure and welcome you later on in your breakout rooms to share your own experiences that highlight ethical tensions in developing reciprocal relationships with partners. So I think I'll leave it at that and let you know where we're coming from. So I'll begin by giving some context on the kind of global experiences we're preparing our undergrads for. So WPI is a small to medium-sized STEM university, and a required and really signature program for all undergraduates is to complete what we call an interactive qualifying project, or IQP, and that's facilitated through our global projects program. And each year we have about 1,000 students that complete their IQP, and about 80 to 90% of our students complete their IQP in one of our 50 project centers that WPI has established throughout the world, some of which are in domestic sites in the US, and the rest are Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, etc. And each project center is led by a faculty director, or in some cases co-directors, who are responsible for identifying local sponsor or host organizations who co-develop projects with the director. And the sponsors also help advise the student teams in partnership with a faculty advisor. The center director is also responsible for finding accommodations and all that fun logistical stuff that comes with international travel. So in the past, Scott has directed the South Africa Project Center, and he'll talk a little bit about his experiences there later on. And currently, Scott and I co-direct the Puerto Rico Project Center. So the typical IQP involves a cohort of 24 students that are divided into 6 teams of 4. And before embarking on their IQP, they complete a 7-week preparation course before traveling to their project site. And during their prep term, students are given a project description and information about their project sponsor. They complete a course where they conduct background research on their project and the site they're traveling to. And they also have weekly meetings with 2 faculty advisors who help them think through their project. And the faculty advisors also travel with them and advise on their projects with the whole cohort. In the following term, the student teams arrive at their project site, and for 7 weeks, they work with their sponsor organization, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 kind of thing. And they complete a project that's broadly at the intersection of science, technology, and society. And many of the projects that Scott and I tend to develop involve deep community engaged research. At the end of the 7-week term, when the students are on site, the students hand over all their deliverables that they created to the host organization, and they document their research proposal in a research project in a formal report that's made publicly available on the university library website. And that's the real beginning to ending blueprint for the IQP, although each project center operates in slightly different ways with different thematic foci and sponsors and preparation requirements and so on. But that just kind of gives you a sense of where we're coming from when we're sharing our experiences. And in the next few slides, as a point of departure to spark broader discussion, Scott and I are going to give some various considerations that we feel are important to be cognizant of when we've been thinking through how to facilitate equitable, reciprocal relationships between our students, our faculty, and local sponsor organizations and host communities. So before our students even arrive at their project sites, we've been thinking through several considerations and laying of necessary groundwork to be done to facilitate a beneficial experience for all parties. And we flagged 3 areas for consideration that resonated strongly with us. And the first thing, or one thing, is the initial process of partnership development. So typically, we would travel to the project site before the students would arrive to begin to develop relationships with NGOs or government organizations, typically, that might be interested in serving as a sponsor for a team of students, and form our, thinking through the 2 things that we find most important when we're gauging whether or not it would be a beneficial relationship is, one, is there going to be mutual excitement and engagement from the project sponsor? And whether we trust the sponsor to be attentive and positively engaged. And those things are often hard to get a sense of in a first initial visit. And there's been some cases where we've got the sense that, well, they might just be being polite and they're not incredibly enthusiastic, and maybe this would just be more of a resource demand for a certain organization. So maybe the right thing to do in that case might be to step away and not pursue those relationships when they don't seem genuinely enthusiastic. But once you have a partnership, ideally one that's going to lead to ongoing regular collaborations, we start exploring the project scoping process, where we're trying to identify mutually beneficial projects that'll be exciting and rewarding for the students, meet the learning goals that we have for them, but also be valuable for the sponsors. And in some cases, we're discussing potential compensation and resources required to support the sponsor in order to complete a project that would be beneficial to them without overstressing them. And a third consideration is the student preparation component. We're thinking through, how do we prepare our students to arrive with a sense of humility, a spirit of co-learning, to evade some of the trappings of trying to solve problems for communities, and helping students gain an understanding of the local culture, arrive with some foundational background knowledge that can be of value. So I'll offer one vignette before I pass it over to Scott, and I'll share a real tension within a partnership development component that took place last summer when Scott and I began co-directing the Puerto Rico Project Center. We had 2 cohorts of students, So nearly 50 students that were coming to Puerto Rico last fall. They had originally planned to travel to Albania and South Africa, but they couldn't travel there due to COVID travel restrictions. So we were able to redirect them to Puerto Rico instead of having them stay in Massachusetts. So Scott and I flew down to Puerto Rico, and we were looking for new sponsor organizations to explore new partnerships to accommodate potentially 12 teams. And many of the organizations, we were just kind of Googling around NGOs that were of interest to us, and we put some feelers out there. And one of the organizations we came across was called Karma Honey Project. And they were this tiny little NGO, and they looked like they had some interesting projects related to protecting the bee population. So we sent them an email, received a really enthusiastic response from a Johnny Williams, who was the leader of their organization, along with his partner, who was the dean of a local university. We initially met Johnny, and similar to other meetings with other organizations, after describing our program and its potential fit with their organization, we explored different project ideas, and we were tuned to whether or not there's mutual excitement and engagement, and if we felt there was personal trust between the sponsor, who would be the main contact point with the students for 7 weeks in Puerto Rico. Johnny was a youngish guy, about 40 years old, really energetic. We met at a bar. He was excitable, kind of had a bro attitude kind of thing. He had a real entrepreneur mindset. He told us he owned a marketing company in Miami and was passionate about saving the bees in Puerto Rico. He shared with us that he'd been working with a friend, his name was Javier, who ran the small church-based NGO, and they were repurposing an abandoned school into a community resiliency center that could offer project possibilities for our students. So Scott and I later went and visited the school. We got a sense of what our students could do, and it all seemed really promising. So our first impression of Johnny was that he was really energetic, really excited about working with us. We thought he'd be pretty fun to work with our students too. So that checked our first box, but we weren't really all on board on trusting him right away. He wasn't a local Puerto Rican. We felt he might not be present because he seemed to have a lot of things on the go. And we also felt there might be like a real possibility he'd be taking the students out drinking or something like that. He just kind of had that vibe. But after meeting with Javier, who was like a local Puerto Rican, more grounded with the community, we agreed to have him as the principal point of contact for the students and decided to move forward. We had 2 projects for our teams that they completed last fall. They were really great projects. One was to design a green roof, and the other helped visualize how they would transform the school to get donor support. So we felt like in the end, it was a good experience for everybody. The real kicker of the story is about a month ago, we got a call from Javier, who informed us that Johnny had been a fugitive in Puerto Rico for about 10 years. And he's on the run for murder and gang crimes that he committed in Canada and was arrested by the US Marshals. So Johnny fooled a lot of people in Puerto Rico, from high-ranking government officials to local universities, his philanthropic partners, and us, of course. Fortunately, nothing bad came from our engagement with Johnny. In fact, our initial connection with him opened up a whole bunch of doors to support community organizations that were rescuing other abandoned schools throughout Puerto Rico. But it did certainly underscore our gut instinct and reinforced our partnership development approach to value both that mutual excitement and engagement with potential partners, along with a sense of personal trust, and thinking through how to reinforce partnerships or possibly abandon them when trust is questionable. So I'm going to pass it over to Scott now, who's going to take the reins and share some ethical considerations for the during and after phases of global experiences before we move into our breakout rooms.
Okay, thanks, JM. So the work that I'm going to give you a little vignette about is a work that we did in Cape Town, South Africa, from about 2007 to 15. And the work quite often was in informal settlements, and we developed a kind of a discursive sensibility around something called shared action learning, which was our way to try and talk with the students, first of all, about what are we doing in this place? How do we understand the core of our relationships? And we're not really going there. Actually, even action research didn't feel like the right terminology, because we're really focused on partnering with groups that were trying to often move something forward, whether in a small way or a big way. And that element of action really informed a lot of how the work transpired and a lot of the ethical dimensions around human interactions, responsibility to multiple stakeholders and what have you. And somewhat different, particularly in an environment in informal settlements where institutional structures are so different from what they are in the university or with many of our other kind of partners. Next slide, Jam. So one of the ways that our work got embodied is through a website that reports on each of the different projects, plus has a resource library that is a teeing up for various audiences, particularly public audiences, around some of the themes we worked most on: water and sanitation, early childhood development, informal settlement upgrading, and those overlapping themes quite often. Next slide. So we're going to zoom in to one project that vied for the longest title of any project. If we start at the end, Wash Up, Water and Sanitation and Hygiene Upgrading Program. And this project was looking at how, at a facility that we helped start the previous year and then had been taken forward by community members, could expand to address health, education, and well-being in the community, because the facility is one of the few public spaces available to folks. And also learning about the underlying challenges in this whole area. Next slide. So the partnership involved this group of folks, which are 2 of our project teams, so 8 students about, and a number of community researchers. One of the targeted goals here was for to help folks who wanted to develop an early childhood development center, an ECD center, or a set of activities around the creche. Next slide. And this is the place. The year before, it had been quite an effort to, in a little postage square space, begin building this facility, and that was its own adventure. And then we had supported community members who took it forward, and all of this work, as much of our work there, was done in an ecosystem that involved a local nonprofit that was an affiliate of Shack Dweller International, a social movement, the Informal Settlement Network, and a municipal entity, in this case, the Stellenbosch municipality, but often City of Cape Town. Those groups were looking at how to collaborate in a community setting with the community leadership and community members. And our add to this often was that our students could be on the ground for 2 months, working very closely with community members and kind of helping turbocharge an effort. Next one, Jam. So one of the things all the students teams do are report on, and we did this through the website, and we did a lot of exploring, and it's kind of sprawling, but there would be typical things: background research, mission and objectives, cast of characters is one way of talking about all the people involved, the project outcomes, but next push of the button, I would be doing this, but we're going to focus on this process narrative, which resonates really nicely with the tips work that we just learned about as strategies for helping students think about and process their experiences. Jam, next one. The students, this was quite free form. We wanted them to speak in their own voice, and they had a lot of creative flexibility. And so this particular team, their 8 weeks were split up into 5 acts that had a number of scenes each. So connecting and planning at the beginning, acting and creating, implementing, observing and reevaluating, and saving goodbye. And we're gonna jump into Act 2 that focused on sort of the early phase there of coming to know their community partners, to figure out ways to work together, to refine the goals of the project. And we'll zoom into Scene 2, Overcoming Obstacles. And this is what the structure we would provide the students. We'd say, give us the setting, the backstory, and the cast of characters, and then a scene, and followed by some reflection. And so the setting, in this case, our day in Longrook starts cloudy and cold, but by the end of the day, the sun is shining and warming up the side of the mountain. There's a lot of commotion as we have our advisors and only a couple community members with us today. We all have a lot on our agenda, so we get started working right away. The backstory is a weekend of planning had resulted in a long, but they thought easily accomplished agenda for Monday. We were excited to start working on the management and operations manual for the aftercare program. That's the program for kids after school, but ended up being faced with a bigger issue that slowed our progress. And now here's the cast of characters: Kungeka, Zadwa, Mama Tandi, and Amanda too because there was another Amanda earlier. Sizwe, who is the lead from the local nonprofit work, me and my partner Steve, who are advising, Trevor, the leader in the Longrook community, and then 3 different student teams. This one is being written by the WASH Serve team that's thinking about the early childhood development. And the WASH Biz team is another team working on more of the business and the economics of it. Okay, so the scene then plays out. Tension with the stipend. And here we're going to surface a whole bunch of kinds of tensions that have ethical dimensions to them. So Costas explains that the WASH Biz group is now in charge of helping the community handle the stipend money provided by WPI. The money, that's a small amount of money we would provide to, in some instances where our partners thought it was appropriate, to help support community members spending significant time with us in the 2 months we were there. The money is being distributed through the savings group. We decided to work together since many of the community members working with our team are not in the savings group, but are getting paid for working with WPI and want to participate in the conversation about the stipend. Once we start working and getting involved in the process, Scott comes in, that's me, to tell us that we do not need to be involved in making decisions about the stipends and should make headway on our own project. We change plans and move out to the storage bungalow to do some work with Amanda Tu and Mama Tandi. Amanda Tu is a new member of the team who moved to Longrook in August and begins working with WPI today. Since she has no experience with any of our projects, we take time to do introductions and explain exactly what we are hoping to accomplish by the end of our time. She speaks beautiful English and appears to be a great asset to our project group. After about half an hour, our team realizes we're not being as productive as we could be, and we are all interested in the money situation happening in the facility. Amanda Tu and Mama Tandi, the only present community members who could work with us on our project, are also interested to know what's happening. We agree to continue with more work the next day and move into the facility to listen in on the money management conversation happening with Sizwe, Trevor, Scott, Kungeka, Zadwa, and the WASH Biz group. There's a feeling of tension as soon as we walk in. Trevor seems to be angry and is aggressively pursuing his point as we take a seat. Luckily, everyone is speaking English, which helps us understand what is happening. Nathan and Danielle moved to finish painting part of the men's room with Mama Tandi for a little bit, while Molly and Heather remained engaged in the conversation. It's hard to follow, and eventually Scott, Sizwe, and Trevor are all speaking at once. Scott makes the point that WPI is paying for community members to speak English when Sizwe and Trevor start speaking Xhosa. Eventually, Scott points out that he, Steve, and Sizwe all need to leave for a meeting. Scott encourages Trevor to stay with the WashBiz team to work through the stipend situation, but once the advisors leave, Trevor makes a quick exit. The energy team waits in the bus for us as our two teams work together to finish creating a list of active members and start figuring out payment for the first 2 weeks. It's slightly awkward conversation since we do not feel it's appropriate that we are handling the payment of community members, people with whom we are supposed to be on the same level, but we get it done efficiently and without conflict. Trevor's help with dividing the money into a daily amount was essential to getting the job done. Next. Soon, we all hop in the van for the long ride home and spend most of the drive discussing ideas about how to approach this new addition to the WashBiz project. It's a helpful conversation, allows everyone to voice their frustrations and begin thinking of solutions. Reflection. Monday was a hard day for our team. We did not have a lot of participation and were extremely frustrated with the way everything was handled. We wanted to make Swalicha a priority, but we were also looking to gain momentum with our own project. Our team was also very interested in the stipend situation since we're working mainly with non-savings group members, but felt that we were not needed or wanted in that discussion. It was a hard day for us to gain any information, but we're hoping for a better day tomorrow. Okay, that's the end of that. We just back up 1 sec. That vignette, and of course you can see lots of things leaping out of that story about whose project is this, which conversations can people be involved in, who gets to decide, who holds the power, who gets to tell who when to speak English, money and its distribution, and representation, who gets to say what happened in this day and in these conversations. And we're not going to actually unpack those. We're going to let you guys talk in the breakout rooms if you want about things that emerge out of this for you. I will say I'm happy to share my 14-page rebuttal to how I was portrayed in this scene, but we did want to, the beauty of it is the students could process this. We could process their experience. We could talk with them in real time. These were sometimes publicly posted, other times just behind the wall. They were shared with partners. So they're were a really interesting way to let the students process their own experience and for us to kind of look over their shoulders and have some discussion about that. Okay, and now just very briefly, let's say in the after phases of the projects, of course, evaluating what happened and what next steps there might be. We try to work with communities over a number of years and stay committed to one another. Question about reporting, about recognition and credit for what gets done, about ownership of future projects, and adjustments we might make in our relationships. Next slide. I will say this is at the end of the prior year. This is when we had jumped in and embarked on building this facility, which is a real challenge. Building things in informal settlements is not easy, and with all these kind of complicated partners. But despite all the tension that first vignette showed, one thing we regularly experienced was joy, connection, a real sense of accomplishment, in large part because of how difficult it usually was, and some of the challenges. Next slide. We did try and, next slide, Jan, please. Recognize and support our partners in many ways. We mentioned the stipend, but also a little certificate that for many people who worked with us was quite welcome. Next slide. There were challenges though, and tensions, and especially because we were all typically motivated to be really trying to get something done in the time frame we had. Our community partners, it was often urgent to them that progress be made on one thing or another. And so that raises the stakes for everybody. And lastly, and this is the facility with the kids. So we really did accomplish some things through these crazy partnerships and efforts. It's very hard to sustain these kind of efforts, as you all know, but we felt real value in our trying to participate in this. Okay, with all of that as some more background than we thought, we were gonna go into breakout rooms, but JM, well, we've got 25 minutes. So do we want to go 10-minute breakout rooms? Okay, so the idea was, it's been a long, wonderful 2 days, that we would just have you decide whether you want to be in a breakout room to try and talk in usually like a group of 3 or 4 small groups, and just have a conversation, whether it's about our stuff or even better, your own work and what issues you're wrestling with, and enjoy the kind of time that we would have more of if we were all in a place together. 10 or 12 minutes, this sort of silly 30 breakout room strategy, we'll see whether we can execute it. The idea was if you, maybe if you're interested in the before time, go to room 1. If there's like, once there's 3 or 4, you might jump to room 2 and room 3, just so you get a small group. If you're interested in the during sort of project sort of thing, start at room 10. Once that's got 3 or 4 people, move to the next one. And similarly, start with 20 if you're interested in some of the post-project conversation. We'll hang out here in the event that the whole breakout room stuff proves more challenging than we think. With that, Jam, are we ready to do it?
I've realized that I haven't figured out how to do it, but I've requested Ellie to help me out, and I think Ellie's got it sorted for us.
Yep, I just opened the rooms. Assuming I did it right, everyone should be able to join one of 29 breakout rooms.
Yeah, it's in an icon on the bottom of the screen. You click on breakout rooms and then you just join the one you want.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I trust that you had a fruitful discussion in your breakout rooms. We certainly had a lot more rooms than we needed, but nice to see we had, I think, 2 breakout rooms talking broadly about before. I think we had 1 talking about during, and then 1 after. And we just like to put it out to you and share in an open way some of the interesting insights or stories or reflections you had of your own experiences or things that Scott and I may have raised at the beginning of our workshop. So maybe I'll put it out to the breakout rooms that we're talking about before global learning experiences for students. What are some of the implications that you were talking about? Yeah, Anne.
So I was wondering, with the permission of Ellie and other folks, if I could raise an issue. It's just going to be a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation, but just wanted to check in with the group that I can raise kind of a difficult issue. Would that be okay?
It's okay with me, yeah.
So, you know, I want to identify myself as a white American who is still learning and making mistakes. And so I'm not trying to call out, I'm trying to do the call in. It may not work, I don't do this all the time, but I just wanted to share a reaction that I had to part of your presentation about kind of finding partners in country and kind of the challenges around that. And I think there was a piece where I felt very uncomfortable when you were kind of sharing the picture of the, and apologies, I can't remember his name, of the person who kind of you didn't end up working with, and he had a bit of a, history. And so I just, especially in the US and white America, sometimes we, when we share information about men of color, we kind of criminalize them or kind of present them in a certain way. And so I felt uncomfortable. You were sharing the information, but you also kind of shared a photo, and I just felt uncomfortable that it was approached in that way, just because I felt like, again, repeating myself, but the way that men of color are often portrayed in newspapers or the media, kind of in a criminalization kind of way. And so I guess I would just ask, perhaps in the future, when and if you make these types of presentations, kind of maybe leaving that part out. I just felt very uncomfortable by it. And again, I'm sorry to raise this issue, but I just felt very strongly when I kind of was viewing that part of the presentation. And so again, I'm trying not to be overly critical. I'm just trying to share kind of my own experience of how I felt that when I was listening to that part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Anne. Are you referring to the fugitive that I was talking about in my story, or someone from when Scott was talking?
The person that you were talking about, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I will share that Johnny is Irish and white, if that clarifies. I know the picture was kind of darker.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't tell from the photo, but it just made me uncomfortable. So I apologize if I got.
No, I appreciate your perspective. Yeah, thanks. Marilyn?
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you for sharing that. I just feel just humbled, and like this is a good space to share those kinds of concerns. And John Michael, I know you to be such a gracious person, and I think it can be difficult to receive that kind of feedback. So I'm thankful to everyone for just being open with their hearts. That's kind of my first point. But I was just discussing with Courtney and Willie and Anka, and Courtney said something that struck me. We didn't have a chance to flesh this out, but about that's okay. Just like the students not being mentally prepared sometimes to go on trips, and that really struck me. But I wanted to add kind of a piece of encouragement. I've had kind of a role of being the academic supervisor for students who go abroad, and in this kind of a more virtual options like I talked about in my presentation yesterday. And I just wanted to share that I think this is common, like more broadly, and maybe a funny anecdote to lighten the mood at the end of the day. I was teaching that craft course that I talked about yesterday as a 10-day intensive immersive course last year. And I think there were 13 students, and 10 of them were taking the course because of anxiety, depression, mental health stuff, and had a really hard time, even in the virtual setting where they were at home. And that's like, it's serious, but there's a few things that people might find a little bit funny, and students joked about themselves in this way. One student had a lot of anxiety around our cooking class because she was 22 but had never cut vegetables or used a stove. Another student, we try to make inclusive classrooms, and in a different reference, someone from the last presentation asked about to what degree of vulnerability do we expose ourselves? And I just wanted to share, one student showed up in the bathtub in one of our classes. So these things are happening all over, and I don't necessarily think they're bound by place. I feel like I'm having a lot of feedback, and I apologize. Are you guys okay?
Yeah.
But I just wanted to share that the burden of mental health, I think, is happening for all of us, and it's not just students who are going a field. And I know, Courtney, it seemed like you were really struggling with how to support those students, how to manage it in a practical sense. And I feel you, and even in the virtual context in our classrooms here, I think that's a real struggle. And then how do we, like, I feel a personal responsibility as someone who's committed to like working towards global equity, even in this kind of anxious, difficult space. And how do we prepare them, you know, to be stewards of the environment, to be working towards equity, to think about their own mental health, to be able to graduate and engage in global issues and in cross-cultural contexts with respect and tact and kindness. So it's not just travel based, and I just wanted to share the bathtub and vegetable cutting as kind of comical examples.
Thanks, Marilyn. I wonder, we have about a minute left. Was there anyone in the after discussion room that maybe rose some issues or had any illustrative vignettes that might be of value to the whole group?
I was in the after group. I think we identified a few challenges, I guess. And it was more general kind of discussion about, you know, when the project finishes, you know, how to create long-term relationships with the community, you know, because short-term relationships might end, and then, you know, the community is left. And if no one in the local community hasn't kind of put forward themselves for continuing some of the, you know, ideas, etc., it's very difficult. But some other challenges we also talked about, how when the donors change their mind or whatever their, you know, philosophy or perspective, they might also pull out the money from, you know, certain areas which have been supported before and now not available. I think that we had more actually. And also I think just last, I think point was about if there were difficult situations during the project, how that also leaves, the relationship with the partnering organization. Does it actually create tensions in the future as well? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. So I'm realizing it's 4:06 and I think that's beyond our time. So I trust everyone had fruitful discussions in your breakout room, and thank you to everyone for sharing your insights. And I think I'll pass it back over to Ellie to resume the conference. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John Michael and Scott. This was another really interesting and insightful presentation. So thank you so much.